headlines. Rumors are brewing as North Korean leader Kim Jong-un continued to remain out of public view Friday as the regime marks the 69th anniversary of the founding of the ruling Workers' Party. Mounting pressure for a rate cut at next week's BOK policy meeting. The BOK chief says monetary policy alone is not enough to stimulate the economy. And Hong Kong's government calls off talks with pro-democracy protesters in a new turn of events as political rivals call on Chief Executive C.Y. Leung to step down, this time over claims that he received millions in private payments while in office. Happy Friday, everyone. Welcome to the program. Thanks for tuning in. We begin with the latest on the Korean Peninsula. The two Koreas exchanged machine gun fire on this Friday evening. This is according to South Korea's Joint Chiefs of Staff that said North Korea shot at balloons carrying anti-Pyongyang messages floated by South Korean activists over the border. Seoul says some of the North Korean shots landed south of the border, prompting its forces to fire back in response. Pyongyang had warned of, quote, uncontrollable catastrophe in case the leaflet campaign was not stopped. And staying with North Korea, rumors brewing over Kim Jong-un's whereabouts. Today, he missed one of the regime's biggest celebrations for the ruling Workers' Party in North Korea, remaining out of the public eye for over a month now. Kim has more.
It was a no-show for the North Korean leader Kim Jong-un at one of the most important political events, the founding of the ruling Workers' Party. Kim's name was absent from a list of party officials who paid tribute to the late leaders Kim Il-sung and Kim Jong-il at the Kumsusan Palace of the Sun on this Friday. The young leader was previously spotted with a limp and last seen at a concert on September 3rd. But it's been more than a month now since Kim Jong-un's made a public appearance, and his absence at the key political anniversary is again fueling speculations of his whereabouts. Korean press reported earlier last month of Kim's possible hospitalization after receiving ankle surgery, or that he could be suffering from gout or diabetes. And with Kim's prolonged absence, the hunches are becoming more elaborate, with the latest pointed to Kim dealing with a speaking disorder due to a stroke. Meanwhile, others point to a possible military coup or even Ebola contraction. The South Korean government, however, has played down the significance of Kim Jong-un's no-show. Seoul's Unification Ministry spokesperson Im Byung-chul said the North Korean leader's rule is still in normal operation. He cited comments made by Kim Yang-gun, a high-level official from Pyongyang who made a surprise visit to the South last week, who said Kim was fine and healthy. Kim's absence is the longest he's been out of the public eye since taking over the regime in 2011. Kim, Arirang News.
Amid growing criticisms over North Korea's human rights record, North Korea says it's presenting its own draft on its human rights conditions to the United Nations. In a letter sent to all other 192 UN member states, North Korea also defended its human rights conditions while boasting its free compulsory education and medical care. While whether Pyongyang will actually present its own draft remains a question, the version by the European Union as well as Japan will be put to a vote in the coming weeks. The European draft recommends this issue to be referred to the International Criminal Court for crimes against humanity. A former senior U.S. diplomat says the U.S. is open to different forms of dialogue, but that doesn't mean its North Korea policy will change. James Kelly, former Assistant Secretary for East Asian Affairs, added there is a reason why Pyongyang is turning to Seoul a lot more these days. Our Hwang Sung-hee has this exclusive interview.
It's interesting that with all the divisions in the American Congress, for example, they are unanimous on not wanting to give any money to North Korea. And as we've seen historically, when North Korea can't get anybody else to give them good things, they turn to their South Korean brothers. And this is good news because any resolution of this issue is going to be done by Koreans on the Korean Peninsula, and not by Americans and not by Chinese.
Now that China is sort of taking a bigger role in the international sanctions against the North, and it's also becoming pretty close with South Korea, do you think that Pyongyang would want to come back to the six-party talks, knowing that it might be outnumbered?
North Korea has never wanted the six-party talks. Certainly at the early stages, it was much more of a 5+1. And when you really get into the issues, all five parties, not including North Korea, all five parties want a denuclearization of weapons on the Korean Peninsula. But I would say that the six-party talks was really the first time that South Korea had a prominent and equal position to everyone else.
Based on your experience as a chief U.S. envoy to North Korea, you've led numerous nuclear talks. Do you think it's ever possible for North Korea to fully give up its nuclear program, or have we come too far to hope for that?
It's possible, but it's not very likely. The nuclear program has benefits that have nothing to do with nuclear weapons or military deterrence or anything else. It is a vehicle that gets North Korea, that would otherwise be one of the more impoverished countries of the whole world, attention on the international stage that it couldn't get any other way. But I see the nuclear weapons question and the whole question of North Korea's isolation and its economic self-isolation from the rest of the world as very closely related problems. And so when you take care of one set of these problems, the others are going to become easier. If North Korea becomes seriously involved in world trade and interactions with other countries, it's going to be less interested in boasting about nuclear weapons that it may or may not have.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly, for your time today.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Pleasure to be here.
And in other news, the Japanese government reportedly believes it will be difficult to come up with a breakthrough policy to resolve the issue of its wartime sexual enslavement. This is according to a Nihon Keizai newspaper report Thursday that said this has been Japan's stance that's been communicated to South Korea during their recent meetings. And supporting such view, a Japanese lower house member Koichi Kagiuda, who serves as a special advisor to Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, has reportedly said in a recent TV interview that Tokyo does not plan to live up to the Kono statement that apologizes for its wartime sexual enslavement. The Korean government says it plans to pressure Japan during next week's UN meeting on this issue to persuade Tokyo to take a more responsible role in resolving the matter.
For the latest in news that impacts Korea and the world, join Kang Chae-ri for a lively half hour that covers politics, business, international news, and much more. Live at 8 every weeknight on Arirang TV.
Human Rights Council headquarters in Geneva on Thursday, finding ways to persuade. Korea's Finance Minister Choi Kyung-hwan and Bank of Korea Governor Lee Ju-hyul are both in Washington attending the IMF and World Bank meetings in the United States. And experts say are sensing there are a very subtle difference between Korea's top two financial authorities in terms of what the right path of recovery for the Korean economy is. Our Kim Ji-yeon reports.
Bank of Korea Governor Lee Ju-hyul said Thursday in Washington that lowering the country's main interest rate could not go so far as to induce economic growth on its own, suggesting that other measures will be needed. A rate cut could actually increase the country's debt in the long term, ultimately constraining domestic demand, since the policy would induce households and businesses to spend more despite their growing debt. Instead, Governor Lee highlighted the need to prioritize structural changes over monetary policies to bridge the gap between the manufacturing and service sectors and between large conglomerates and small and mid-sized companies. His comments come amid mounting pressure on the central bank to lower the country's benchmark interest rate from the current 2.25%, which was lowered 0.25 percentage point in August. The economic team, led by Finance Minister Jong-un, has called for stimulus measures to raise billions of US dollars of capital for its expansionary policies to boost economic growth. An economist from the Korea Institute of Finance says pursuing such aggressive policies without dealing with structural problems will lead to a similar case like Japan.
Japan didn't address its structural problems while pursuing expansionary policies that work only for a short period of time. Its interest rate is currently near zero, while the country's debt expanded to a level that it can't handle.
The Bank of Korea is expected to make a decision on the rate next Wednesday. Meanwhile, there are differences of opinion on how the Korean economy is doing. Finance Minister Jong-un says the economy will grow to the upper 3% range this year, while the BOK scaled back its previous projection to the mid 3% range. Kim Jong-un, Arirang News.
We can see the impact of the ever-advancing technology in pretty much every aspect of our daily lives, and one example of that is the way we listen to music. Long gone are the days that we had to wait for CDs to come out, and this is great for music lovers, but for artists it has pros and cons. Our Shin Se-min tells us more.
Downloading and streaming services have given music lovers unlimited access to their favorite albums, but for the artists themselves, the technology is a double-edged sword. Four-time Grammy Award-winning record engineer Jimmy Douglas says the shift has made it much more difficult for musicians and record companies to generate profits.
Even though we seem to have entered a new age where the record companies don't quite have the same hold, now the money's gotten away, and now the streaming people have hold of the money. So what happens, the little guy gets totally pushed out of the way, and the big guy is now making more money, which is great for them, but it's just not equitable.
And while the effects of the fast-changing nature of technology has had negative effects, musicians have also used it to their advantage for free publicity.
And sometimes it even leads to contracts with actual record labels. Such was the case with Eastern Sidekick, a Korean indie rock band.
At first, we started out small, but after a couple of gigs at clubs in Hongdae and putting some of our performances online, the size of the crowds grew, and this is where we are now.
Count business manager Eric Sussman among those who have benefited from the changing times. Through a Kickstarter campaign along with the now famous Amanda Palmer, the duo raised more than $1 million in just 18 months. Sussman said similar campaigns could be a good fit for Korean musicians.
Especially with how wired Korea is, it seems to me that getting the message out ought to be very easy. And the more people you reach, the higher your chances of finding the people that will support you. And in that sense, I think the market here is ripe for this kind of action.
Insiders say newcomers will have to take full advantage of the technology already established in Korea to make themselves heard by the masses. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
This year's Nobel Peace Prize has been jointly awarded to teenage activist Malala Yousafzai of Pakistan and 6-year-old campaigner of children's rights Kailash Satyarthi of India. The Norwegian Nobel Committee on Friday named the two in acknowledgement of their struggle against the suppression of children and young people worldwide. Satyarthi, a veteran activist, has led various peaceful protests and demonstrations against the exploitation of children for financial gain. And at the age of just 17, Malala, who was shot in the head by Taliban gunmen in 2012 for campaigning for girls' education, is now the youngest recipient of the prize. Roughly 9 out of 10 residents in a city in Korea's Gangwon-do province say they don't want a nuclear power plant in their neighborhood. But the Korean government has rejected the results of a local referendum on this issue. Our Kim Hyun-bin has the details.
As expected, residents of the city of Samcheok have rejected a referendum on a nuclear power plant in their city. 84.9% of the city's residents were against plant construction and only 14.4% for it. With the participation of over 2/3 of the city's 420,000 eligible voters. The referendum was hosted by the city and anti-nuclear power plant activists seeking to force the central government to retract the plan to build a plant.
Residents of Samcheok, we have won today. I am moved to tears by your support.
The Ministry of Trade, Industry and Energy says that the results are invalid on grounds the poll was arranged by a civic group and not by the official election management committee. The ministry has made it clear it will push ahead with the plan to build a plant. Pro-nuclear power plant groups have also questioned the poll's reliability.
We can't accept the results of a vote orchestrated to pursue interests of local government employees. It's an invalid exercise, so should be nullified.
The dispute over the plant between the residents and the government has gone on for 4 years, intensifying since the Fukushima nuclear power plant disaster in 2011. This isn't the first time the government has tried to build a nuclear power plant in Samcheok. Another plan was scrapped in 1998 due to citizen protests. Although the government has rejected the results of the Samcheok referendum on the basis that it was conducted independently, it accepted the results of another locally arranged referendum held in 2004. That year, a plan to build a radioactive waste disposal facility in Puan, southwest of Seoul, was scrapped after voters rejected it in a similar referendum. Despite international efforts to reduce the number of nuclear power plants, Korea has plans to build 7 additional plants by 2035. Kim Hyun-bin, Arirang News.
Amid growing fears of the deadly Ebola virus, top leaders from international groups are raising their collective voice to quickly combat this outbreak. And Paul Yi is joining us from the News Center. Paul, the United Nations has been one of the most vocal organizations on this health crisis. What are they saying now?
Well, in the latest call to action, UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon said there needs to be a 20-fold surge in international aid and resources to deal with the disease in West Africa. World Bank President Kim Jong-un warned of catastrophic economic costs to the African continent if world powers fail to act now. Dr. Tom Frieden, the director of U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, echoed the sentiment on Thursday. He warned Ebola could turn into the world's next AIDS crisis unless a major intervention was immediately launched. The CDC director stressed the epidemic was changing every day and that speed was the most important factor.
I will say that in the 30 years I've been working in public health, the only thing like this has been AIDS. And we have to work now so that this is not the world's next AIDS. We can control it by speed going to the local level, supporting not just the countries, but the counties, districts, and prefectures. That's where the battle will be fought and where it can be won.
The 3 leaders were speaking in Washington at a global summit of the IMF and World Bank. The World Health Organization says nearly 4,000 people have died in the current Ebola outbreak, with the death toll averaging about 50% of cases since the beginning of this year.
And shifting to the civil unrest in Hong Kong, pro-democracy leaders have called on supporters there to take to the streets once again. And this call to action comes after talks with the government collapsed earlier today. What went wrong?
Well, the formal meeting between student leaders and high-level Hong Kong officials was to kick off earlier today, but they were called off, with each side blaming the other for being insincere. The territory's #2 official, Chief Secretary Carrie Lam, made the announcement last night, saying calls by activist leaders to return to protests had seriously undermined the basis for constructive dialogue. The demonstrators are hoping for another massive turnout tonight on the city streets as they continue to push for fully democratic elections.
Only through gathering more people and gathering the power, we could show the government that Hong Kong people will not give up, and we will keep putting pressure on the government unless the government gives any concrete proposal on solving the constitutional issue.
Meanwhile, Hong Kong's chief executive CY Leung is under fire over allegations of bribery after reportedly accepting more than $6 million from an Australian company. Hong Kong lawmakers are demanding a thorough investigation into the report by an Australian media outlet. Leung's office has denied any wrongdoing.
And staying with China, heavy clouds of smog have blanketed the capital city of Beijing, raising health concerns for local residents. And this is not exactly news for China. And China has been struggling to get a handle on this air pollution issue. What's prompted this latest alert?
Well, Beijing has been shrouded in smoky white smog since earlier this week, prompting the authorities to issue a yellow alert on Wednesday, which was raised to an orange alert on yesterday. Now, that's the second highest warning for air pollution in the country. The thick clouds have forced many people to stay indoors, with most commuters seen wearing protective masks when venturing outside. The U.S. Embassy there measured the most noxious form of the air pollution at over 300 micrograms per cubic meter, which is considered hazardous. It's left many residents expressing concerns for the future.
My concern is that if the pollution continues in the coming years, the chances for weak, elderly people and children to get sick will rise. This would in turn have a severe impact on the family, so we young people are worried.
Weather officials say a cold front and stronger winds are forecast for Saturday, which should help disperse the smog that has covered large parts of northern China. An official government report earlier this year cited that severe pollution in Beijing has made it barely suitable for living, despite measures aimed at improving air quality in recent years.
And finally, Paul, Facebook has laid out its plans for the popular messaging app WhatsApp. And this social network officially acquired WhatsApp last week, technically in a multi-billion-dollar deal. And it looks like they're not in a hurry to make money off it just yet.
Right, and that's coming straight from founder and CEO Mark Zuckerberg. He says Facebook has no near-term plans to monetize a popular service, which has signed up more than 600 million users worldwide. The final acquisition price for WhatsApp rose to roughly $22 billion on Monday, mostly due in part to the increased value of Facebook's stock in recent months. But despite the high cost, Zuckerberg said that he was more focused on the long-term success of the company.
I think that the market for WhatsApp should be in the billions, right? Definitely more than a billion people. We should be able to connect using WhatsApp in the next few years. You know, we already have one good core business at Facebook. So rather than just trying to focus on how we're going to make money on WhatsApp in the near term.
Zuckerberg was speaking on Thursday in India at the first summit for Internet.org, which aims to expand Internet access in developing countries. The summit comes ahead of his planned meeting with Prime Minister Narendra Modi on Friday. Charity?
Thank you so much, Paul, for those stories. Good stuff there. And we'll see you back here in just about 2 hours.
Hello and welcome. I'm Kim Bo-kyung with your weather updates. Today felt more like late summer rather than autumn, and daytime highs in most regions rose about 5 degrees above the seasonal average under clear skies. But numbers will drop to the low teens as the night progresses, and not all regions got to enjoy sunshine. It's been raining in areas along the eastern coast as an indirect effect of Typhoon Pongpong. Looking ahead to the weekend, we'll continue to enjoy warm temperatures along with strong winds. Also, rain is in store down south on Sunday, which should gradually clear up by Monday. Moving on to Saturday's readings, Seoul will mix it to 27, Gwangju 28, and Busan 23. On to other regions, Daejeon reaches 26, Jeju will be at 23, Dokdo 20. That's all the updates for now. Have a wonderful Friday evening, and we leave you with the international weather.
And that will do it for this edition of Arirang News at 8. Thanks for watching.